G'day guys and welcome. My name is Michael and I am the DeadAussieGamer, here to share with you my tips, tricks, ideas and strategies for playing and running tabletop role-playing games. Today we are doing another GM advice video focusing on when it is appropriate to begin your lines of communication. Now I know that sounds very wordy, but let me break it down into something simpler. When is it appropriate to talk about rules? When is it appropriate to interject with my character stuff during a game? One of the major important things about any role-playing game is understanding the lines of communication. When is it appropriate to bring stuff up at your table? When is it appropriate to address your GM? Can I talk out of character during my game? Or when do I really get into the intricate role-play of my theatrical character? All of these things are really important, but I think we don't really have the opportunity to explain when those appropriate times are. It's something that we've just kind of acknowledged because, you know, the older veteran players have sort of known since the beginning. So of course, we know now. But, you know, with things like Critical Role, Stranger Things, and many other forms of media attracting newer people, I thought this is a great time to talk about when should we be communicating stuff. So, without any further ado, or waffling, which I like doing. I love waffles. Waffles are great. We are going to start by talking about when is it appropriate to discuss rules. Now, there are two types of rules discussions, I like to say. The first is contestation, and the second is clarification. Clarification is if you are a brand new player, never hesitate to ask about your abilities, your skills, how the game works. You're there to learn, and that everyone acknowledges that. The only thing I'd need to say, if you are someone new and you want rules clarification, look at when is it appropriate to talk to my GM and when can I ask another player? Because chances are you're sitting around the table with people that may already know how to play. If you have a question, such as when do I make attacks, you might be able to ask the person next to you. Do it quietly so that your GM can continue whoever they're talking to, you know, continue their scene. While you off to the side go, oh, sorry, pardon me. I know like we're in a fight now and I know that there's an order of the fight. When it's my turn, how many things can I actually do? And, you know, half the time people are going to go, oh, okay, you know, yeah, it's this. Or they'll turn around and say, oh, you know, the GM will let you ask that when, or he'll explain it when it gets to your turn. Both are fine. Clarification is something you should never be ashamed of. And I want to say this again, to reiterate it. Do not ever feel ashamed to clarify, especially on my tables. If you're on my table, by any chance, seriously, like just say, oh, pardon me, sorry, excuse me. What's happening here? I just would like it explained because I'm new. I love meeting new people because they're always the people who want to know new things. The second type is the contestation person. Now, these are the... okay, there is a certain negativity about the contestation rules, and I will always say this. A great rule of thumb is save contestation questions for the end of a game or before a game. Have a notebook on hand. Write down any contestations you have, and then bring it up later. While you're at a game, while you're at a table, and I do this, just go with it. Pretend like for a moment those rules are the cardinal rules of the game right this second. Now, if a GM makes a general mistake that you've noticed, like he's forgotten someone's turn, or he's not remembered that an ability is currently in effect that directly impacts him. Sure, gentle reminders, fantastic. That's not a contestation. That's just kind of like keeping everyone aware of what's happening in the scenario. Rules contestations are something along the lines of, well, if I cast Fireball here, it says that it does this much damage, but you said I did this much damage. How could that be if I actually have this many dice rolled plus my extra stuff? Does it really affect this? Or, I mean, like, because technically it's a fire spell, but I have steam magic. And if I use create water, can I then... These rules, while great and creative and can incite a wonderful debate, should be saved for before and after a game. When you're at a table, try to not take more than, say, a couple of minutes away from any situation with a contestation-based inquiry. That's a general rule of thumb. General rule of thumb, just keep it for the end or keep it for the beginning. I used to keep notepads, actually. That was one of the things I was mentioning. And I used to write down anything I had. And then at the end of the game, I basically gave the notepad to my GM and I said, tell me what you think. Like, is this a thing? Is this how it works? If not, help me work through it. Can you explain? Like, is this the interpretation? One negative thing that does occur when you look at contestation-based communication is you want to avoid telling your GM they're wrong. Now, there are 3 ways we can tell our GM that they're wrong without even saying it. The first is if we say, I can see why you'd think that. Oh, passive aggressive to the T. Never say that to your GM. Don't say, I can see why you think that. That is such a thing of, it's like, oh, I can see why you are mistaken. The second is, if that's how you want to play it, or if that's how you want to read it, which is, yeah, you're wrong, but I'll just go with you. Right? Again, that's the second very passive-aggressive one. The third one is the whatever. Now, the whatever is usually at the pinnacle of frustration. The worst thing about it is if you're on the receiving end of a whatever, you know it's not resolved. Which means that the communication is that I don't want to talk about this right now. You're not listening, I'm not listening, I'm just shutting you out at this point. The whatever is an end of communication, and you never want to really get to that point. Instead of that, what you really want to say is things like, okay, I can understand where you're coming from. This implies, rather than, I can see why you'd think that, I understand where you're coming from means that I have given your thoughts consideration. Or, oh, I see what you mean there. Now, even if you think they're wrong, saying those things does not put your GM in a position where they feel inferior in any way based on the discussion, which of course you do not want him to feel, or her to feel, during a game. Because that's the worst thing you could feel during a game, is that your players aren't having fun, or that they're questioning what you're doing because, it's somehow impacting the enjoyment of the session. These things add stress to a scenario, and it is very stressful if that is constantly happening. The third thing, if you want to disengage, if, say, the argument's gone for too long, if, it's getting too riled up, it's like, how about we just, we'll play it as is, put a pin in it, and we'll talk about it later. Because that implies that, yes, you are going to discuss it later, but we need to keep going on with the game. And you'll find that people are generally pretty cool about that. So that's mechanical. So we've talked about mechanics. Let's talk narrative now. When is it appropriate to talk about narrative? Well, there are 2 types of narratives that I think get touched on the most. There is the world narrative, and then there's the personal narrative. The world narrative is what the story is that the GM is trying to tell. Your characters are after a magical sword that they need to deliver to a king from an ancient land. It's not really a personal quest, it's just the quest. The second is a personal quest, where the personal form, where you say, I'm looking for my long-lost sister. When it is appropriate to talk about your main quest, all the time. It is always appropriate. Just not during another person's turn to speak. Don't interrupt someone else to say the same thing. Nothing irritates me more than when someone goes, all right, cool. So I'm going to inspect the hilt of the blade. You said there's an insignia on it. I want to make a knowledge history check on it. Only to have someone else say, oh, I make a knowledge history check on it too. Because I can. Now, that can be very tempting because there is a certain mechanical element to the game. But what I highly recommend, and try doing this because I swear your gameplay will change dramatically, is get to that point where you don't force yourself to take the action that someone else has taken. Instead, just remind them or gently suggest to them as players, like, hey, by the way, I also have this ability. And encourage them to give you the weapon or give you a look at it. It's like, okay, cool, I've rolled my knowledge history. I got a 12, okay. Did I know anything? No, I didn't know anything. Oh, okay. Oh, by the way, I actually have a little bit of history knowledge. He goes, oh, well, my character then hands the sword and says, look, I can't think of anything. What do you make of this? And then they get to engage as well. Because what that becomes is rather than an interjecting, you are then being invited into the scene. And that's way better. That's 100 times better. And that's what you want to get. Now, personal quests. The personal quest is a tough one because really you are role-playing about something that is involving you very personally. It's between you, it's between the GM. It also tends to isolate other players. So you want to make sure that you hit 3 parameters before you engage in any personal roleplay. Number 1, you need to make sure that it is relevant to your personal quest. Do not, in the middle of a engagement or in the middle of another person's story, turn around and start prattling on about your own story. I had a scenario, and I won't mention names, but we were doing a game, and we were trying to figure out what the hell to do. We were in a really tough spot. And we were asking around in the group. We were like, hey, what do you think we should do? Hey, what do you think we should do? And we asked this other person, like, hey, what do you think we should do? And he went off to the side and then sort of started contemplating his own life choices that brought him eventually to here and why he hasn't actually progressed in his own quest. Even though he has been traveling for this long, he needs to find a clue. Otherwise, he has no idea what to do. Now, while we all appreciate a good bit of roleplay, that moment there was you heard nothing about what we were doing. You've gone off on a completely different tangent. I guess we'll continue our story while you're sitting there doing your thing. So number 1, make sure that the scene is about you. If someone turns around and says, hey, I noticed you've been handling your locket quite a lot recently. Is everything all right? Or if someone goes, this guy has the same last name as you, that's when you know that it is time to get into your main roleplay. It is time to follow into that quest. That's the great time for it. The second big checkoff is you want to always make sure that you are engaging someone. Engaging someone. Not just, I go into a corner and I brood because my character's super edgy and I contemplate all my stuff and I think about this and I think about that. Don't do that, right? If you want to roleplay your own personal stuff, roleplay with everyone else. You know, if you have an emotion, like find someone who you like in the group and talk to them about it. Like, hey man, listen, can we talk? I just need to get some things off my chest, you know. Life is hard and, you know, as you guys know, I was orphaned at a really young age. And I just found out that I have a half-sister who's in an orphanage nearby. I don't know what to do. I've never had a family before, but I'm worried that she might be in some kind of danger because of, you know, us being adventurers and heroes, that someone may find her and, oh God, you know, have those moments, but engage people with them, because then people can respond, people can react, people won't be on their phones going, oh God, here he goes again. Yep. Cool. Yeah, huh? You don't say. That's kind of how you want to do that communication. The third and final thing is you want to make sure that you are not the one in control. And I mean, this is maybe just me as a GM, and this is my own style. If you write your own backstory, so much so that it is its own unique story, completely aside from the adventure, and you leave your GM nothing to work with, then your GM's not going to be interested in what you're doing. The GM will give you the barest minimum of your story to engage with. Give your GM inspiration. Allow them to be able to be the ones to surprise you and write up your story. Because that's what they're there for. That's what they do. You know, if you turn around and say, well, you know, my cousin, twice removed, actually was a Hell Knight and she betrayed the order. It was in secret. We don't know about it yet. But then she started her own organization of Hell Knights. And all of these guys, they're really big and aggressive dudes, and they've been rampaging around the place. They've been earning a reputation and a name, which, of course, my cousin, she's got the same name as me, so everyone's mistaking me for her, and which means I need to now go on a quest to go find her secret hideout and figure out that that's actually who they're talking about. At that point, your GM just goes, okay, sure, you find all that stuff out, you go find your cousin, you kill her, good, let's go on with the story. You don't want it to happen that way. You want to make sure that you ask your GM, like, hey, I was thinking about this for a plan, for an idea, for a story. What do you think? Oh, that's really cool. Give and take. Throw that feedback out there, but always be willing to receive it as well. So that is how we communicate at a table during our role-playing games. Now, this is just basically how do we speak about our characters, how do we speak about the mechanics of the game. There are tons of other things we need to be able to communicate, such as us as players, when do we have a good day? When do we have a bad day? When do we just need a bit of space? When do we want to really kind of engage in a fight or a combat because we've done so much of this narrative stuff? When do we want to phone it in when a puzzle is too hard? There are hundreds and thousands of different ways you'll need to communicate. But for the moment, the most important ones are, to recap, communicating in a mechanical sense, communicating conflicting or contested rules before or after a game. Clarification rules can happen at any time, just as long as it is convenient for who you are asking. If you're asking the GM, make sure they're not engaging someone. If you're asking your neighbor, make sure they're not being engaged. Communicating your background, making sure that the narrative is either about the scenario happening that is determined by your GM, that it engages the other members of the table, and of course, that you work with your GM so that they are the ones who are creating the story and the narrative for you to be able to interact and engage with. Alright guys, thank you so much for joining us. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. Go check out all of our other really cool stuff. Go visit us on Twitch, go visit us on Facebook. And of course, if you want to come hang out with me directly, the Discord link is down below. We have a huge RPG community of people that talk about some really deep and insightful stuff on the channel at the moment. So definitely come along and have a look at that. And if you want to help support the Dead Aussie Gamer, then head on over to our Patreon page, patreon.com/DeadAussieGamer. And for as little as $2 a month, you can really help make all the difference in keeping the lights on and these shows looking better and better. Till next time, guys, as always, game hard or die trying. See yas.